I have tried to put my story to bed for a long time, but it is anxious, it is restless, and it will not let me sleep. It's like a young child that keeps tapping you on the shoulder, wanting a drink of water and to hear the story again. This is a story of a family heirloom. A small Victorian beaded bag made of velvet with tiny, intricate beadwork on it. The story goes that it was carried by my grandmother on her wedding day when she married for love against her parents' wishes. It was special to my mother, too. And despite my best efforts to resist its charms, it is special to me. This is an object smaller than a football, roughly 8 to 10 inches in length, maybe 6 inches tall, about 4 inches deep, perhaps. Not very big. And yet it seems to affect the people who have held it in their hands in strange and mysterious ways. And what I mean by that is that we have a hard time letting it go. We have a really hard time letting it go. So if you will, think about holding it in your hand. If you look at the front of this bag, it has the picture of an elk with a full rack of antlers made of these tiny, tiny little seed beads. Not the round, machine-made beads that we see today, but something really special. And as you turn it to the side, you would see on the smaller panel an American flag. Turn it again, you see the silhouette of a rabbit, still in these tiny little beads. Turn it again, and there's an American eagle, a little sort of tribute to Americana, Victorian style, if you will. This is kind of special. But what makes this bag special is not the workmanship, and it is not the antique value either. What makes this bag special is the web of intrigue that is woven by the people who have had it in their hands over the years. My mother included. My mother's name was Glyvelle, Glyvelle. Her friends called her Gly. And she was every bit as unusual as that name would suggest. She was beautiful, stunning really. She was adventurous, and she was fun. She loved a good story too, especially if there was some intrigue to it. Especially if there was some intrigue to it. And that intrigue may be behind my angst, my discomfort with this story. You see, I was put in kind of a catch-22 situation. If I kept the purse, I would keep faith with my late mother and father. If I gave it to the people who asked me for it, I would satisfy my extended family, but my parents would probably roll over in their graves. This was not a good situation. My first exposure to this bag happened probably 7 or 8 years ago. My mother was wheelchair bound, late stage diabetes, on dialysis a few times a week. And my father had quit his job to take care of her. Things had gotten hard. And so the decision was made that they would move to Colorado so that I could help take care of my mother. Now, my parents had moved many times before. My father's job was such that every few years they would relocate, and sometimes on very short notice, so they didn't necessarily have time to unpack and set up house again. So in their home, there were several households worth of belongings, boxes stacked all the way to the ceiling in the basement. Dad needed help. So several family members, myself included, converged on the house to help Mom and Dad pack, to get ready for this big journey. It went something like this. My mother had a hard time letting go of things. My father always said it was because, as a young child, her house had burned to the ground. And this purse that I've described seems to have been one of the few objects that was rescued from the fire. So having lost everything as a child, she would tie her memories up in the objects that had been present at key moments in her life. And she would tell stories of the family that would make you feel like you were right there, having a great time with all these cast of characters that were larger than life, really. So here we were trying to help Mom clean out the house. And I would bring things to her if it was something that might upset the apple cart if it went to the Goodwill. And I would say, Mom, what do I do with this? And she would usually say, pack it, keep it. And then she would tell a story about a great time she had on vacation while wearing that dress. Or she would remind you of the day that the two of you bought that souvenir together and tie in an inside joke you'd forgotten as you put it in the box marked Colorado. This went on for a while, and eventually I went into one of the spare rooms and I opened up a cedar chest, you know, the kind you put things in to protect them from moths. And there was a white shopping bag in there, just a plain plastic shopping bag. And I pulled it out, and I opened it up and I looked inside, and there, wrapped in plastic, was this Victorian purse. Now, I had never seen it before at this point. So I brought it to my mom and said, Mom, what's this? Her eyes lit up, and she looked around, and then she asked, is my sister in the house? And I said, no, why? She said, don't tell her that I have this. And then she proceeded to tell me the story of this fabulous bag from her perspective. You see, my mother had been the youngest of 6 kids, and what that meant was that when her parents became ill, as a young teenager, she became their caretaker. Her father had been mustard gassed in World War I, had lost an arm in a factory accident working afterwards, and her mother suffered from emphysema and was bedridden for a while. So this was a tough thing for a young teen to take on. But somewhere in all this difficulty and caring for her mother, my mom was given this purse. Now, this is where other people's stories begin to differ, because there are multiple family members who claim ownership of this bag, and they have tales that are potentially as legitimate as my story. There was some contention over this. Everybody wanted it. So my mother became a little secretive about it, and she kept it. It was special to her, and she kept it many years through many, many moves. And then she informed me that for this move, it was my job to smuggle it to Colorado under cover of darkness. No one was to know that I had it. And it was my responsibility then to return it to her once she got settled. I had no idea what I was getting into, but I did as I was asked. So I put the purse in my suitcase, and I brought it back to Colorado. Mom and Dad moved out, and we settled into a routine of medical appointments, dialysis, but also time with my children and laughter around my dinner table that punctuated this rather dreary existence that had come to be hers. And this went on for a while, and the purse was still safe and sound at my house, not in the foreground, not forgotten either. And soon the holidays were rolling around. And for what would have been my mother's last Christmas, I didn't know that at the time, I wanted to do something really special for her. And I remembered that I still had that purse. So I went to a hobby shop and I bought a nice display case for it. I wrapped it in Christmas paper, put a big old bow on it, and put it under her tree. She was thrilled. Win, great daughter moment, best Christmas gift ever. She was so happy because I hadn't just given her something she wanted, but it was the completion of a circle. I had kept my promise. This thing she had treasured and kind of guarded against others who wanted it all these years had been returned to her by someone who could have easily kept it. This was special. And it stayed on the mantle for the rest of her life, which turned out to be rather short. And in the coming 5 or 6 months, she kept trying to give it to me. I would say, Mom, I don't want it. People will fight over that thing. I do not want that drama. And she would insist. And then I would sneak out of the house without it. And this happened many, many times. In April of 2009, my mother breathed her last. And the purse still sat on the mantle. My father, in the depths of his grief, within a few weeks, received a letter from a family member asking for the purse and explaining that my mother had promised it to her. This person had no idea what had transpired in the last 6 months, to be fair. My father did not know what to do. He was mortified, and I didn't know what to tell him. And so he did something very out of character. This was an honest man. He said, I don't know where it is. And it sat on the mantle. And we cried a lot, and we worked through our grief. And within a couple months, though, he received another letter from another family member, again explaining why this person had a right to it, and it should be given to her if he should happen to find it in my mother's things. At that point, my dad says, you've got to take this. You have to. Oh, God, Dad. Okay, I'll take it. He didn't want to lie, but he couldn't break faith with his wife. I mean, her wishes were very clear. So then it sat on my mantle for several months, and I studied it, and I wrote about it. And I took it to an academic conference where a room full of scholars from around the world talked about the ways that material objects can influence the unfolding of human events. And then I gave it away to someone who didn't ask for it. I believed that if I did that, if I gave it of my own free will to someone who wasn't part of the drama, I would be free. I wouldn't be wrapped up in that web of intrigue anymore. Not so fast. Didn't quite work out that way. So time went on. About another year and a half after I had given up the purse. In the meantime, I lost my father to cancer. And just a couple months ago, I received a text message from a family member describing this beaded Victorian bag in detail and saying that if I ran across it in my mother's things, it belonged to this relative. It belongs to everybody. The story was plausible, but I got defensive. I don't like to admit that. Nobody likes to admit being defensive, but I was defensive. I replied, I don't have it. I consider the matter closed. Needless to say, her response included a rather colorful and unflattering description of my character. But that's okay. That's okay. Maybe this story would have ended if I had just destroyed it when I had the chance. Or if I had sent it off to a museum somewhere, but I didn't. And so I carry with me the burden of knowing where it is and a big old suitcase full of gratitude that I don't have it. And a sinking feeling that even though I possessed it for a short time, perhaps for the rest of my life, this purse might just own a piece of me, and I'm not really sure how I feel about that. Thank you.